Chapter 21 of Grace Harlowe's Plebe Year at High School. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Christine Blashford. Grace Harlowe's Plebe Year at High School by Jessie Graham Flower. Chapter 21. The Lost Letter. Spring was well advanced, full of soft airs and the sweet scents of orchards in full bloom. Through the open windows of the schoolroom, Grace could hear the pleasant sounds of the out-of-doors. The tinkle of a cowbell in a distant meadow, and the songs of the birds brought to her the nearness of the glorious summer-time. She chewed the end of her pencil impatiently, endeavouring to withdraw her attention from the things she liked so much better than Latin, grammar, and algebra. Examinations were coming, those bugbears of the young freshman, and then vacation. A vision of picnics crossed her mind, of long days spent out of doors, with luncheon under the trees and tramps through the woods. Yet before all these joys must come the inevitable final test, the race for the freshman prize. Although, after all, only two would really enter the race, Miriam and Anne. Nobody else would think of competing with these two brilliant students. How tired Anne looked. She had done nothing but study of late. No party had been alluring enough to beguile her from her books. She had even discontinued her work with Mrs. Gray, and early and late toiled at her studies. She will tire herself out, Grace thought, and made a resolution to take Anne with her on a visit to her grandmother's in the country just as soon as the high school doors were closed for the summer. Miriam was not studying so hard, but then she never did anything hard. She simply seemed to absorb without taking the trouble to plod. She had been very defiant of late, Grace thought, and more insolent than ever before. She and Miss Leece were thicker than was good for Miriam, considering that teacher's peculiar disposition to flatter and spoil her. However, that was none of Grace's business, and certainly Miss Leece had been careful since the sound rating Miss Thompson had given her. Just then the gong broke in upon Grace's reflections. With a sigh of relief, she closed her book and strolled with her friends down to their usual meeting place in the locker room. There was but one topic of conversation now, the freshman prize. "Anne," predicted Nora, "you just can't help winning it. I don't believe it's in you to make a mistake. Miss Leece always gives you the hardest problems too, but she can't stump little Anne." Anne smiled wearily. It was well examinations were to begin in 2 days. In her secret soul she felt she could not hold out much longer. Moreover, Anne was worried about family affairs. She had received a letter that morning which had troubled her so much that she had been on the point, a dozen times, of bursting into tears. However, if she won the prize, not the small one but the big one, the difficulty would be surmounted. Another worry had crept into her mind. She had lost the letter. A little wayward breeze had seized it suddenly from her limp fingers and blown it away. She knew the letter was lurking somewhere in a corner of the schoolroom, and she had hoped to find it when the class was dismissed. But the missing paper was nowhere in sight when she had searched for it during recess. Perhaps it had blown out the window, in which case it would be brushed up by the janitress and never thought of again. Not for worlds would Anne have had anyone read that letter. It was during the afternoon session, in the middle of one of the schoolroom recitations, that she caught sight of her letter again. But after the class was dismissed and she had made haste to the corner of the room where she thought she had seen it under a desk, it was not there. Disappointed and uneasy, Anne put on her hat and started home. All afternoon she worried about it. Perhaps it was because she was so tired that she was especially sensitive about the letter being found by someone else. If that someone else should read the contents, she felt it would mean nothing less than disgrace. "You look exhausted, child," said Anne's sister Mary, who was weary herself, having worked hard all day on a pile of spring sewing Mrs. Gray had ordered. "Why don't you take a walk and not try to do any studying this afternoon?" "I think I will, sister," replied Anne, and pinning on her hat, she left her small cottage and started toward High School Street. Turning mechanically into the broad avenue shaded by elm trees, she strolled along, half dreaming and half waking. She was so weary she felt she might lie down and sleep for 20 years, and like Rip Van Winkle awaken old and grey. It was foolish of her to be so uneasy about that letter. Was it a premonition that compelled her to return to the schoolroom and search again for it? Perhaps the old janitress might have found it. The young girl quickened her pace. She must hurry if she wanted to catch the old woman before the latter closed up for the night. Anne had not thought of looking behind. Her mind, so trained to concentration, was now bent only upon one subject. But would it have swerved her from her present purpose even if she had noticed Miss Leece following her? The high school was still open, although Anne could not find the janitress. Perhaps the old woman was asleep somewhere. On several occasions she had been found sleeping soundly when she should have been brushing out schoolrooms and mopping floors. Anne was determined, however, to give one good, thorough search for her letter, and she accordingly mounted to the floor where the freshman classroom was situated and entered the large, empty recitation room. She looked long and carefully under the desks and benches, even going through the scrap baskets, but there was no sign of the letter. Then she went into some of the other classrooms, but her search was unrewarded. "What's the use?" she asked herself at last. "It's sure to have been destroyed. I think I'll just have to give it up and try to rest a little before tomorrow, or I'll never be fit to try for that prize." As she started down the broad staircase, she heard the rasping voice of Miss Leece mingling with the principal's cool, well-modulated tones. Anne paused a moment, watching the two figures below. Miss Leece looked up and caught her eye, but Miss Thompson was engaged in unlocking the door and did not see the little figure lingering on the steps. Just as the door opened, another door slammed violently, and the next moment Anne heard footsteps running along a small passage that crossed the corridor. Leaning far over the rail, she caught a glimpse of a figure. It was... No, Anne could not be certain of the identity, but it looked like, well, never mind whom. Anne meant to keep the secret, for it was evident that the person had been bent on mischief, else why slam a door and run at the approach of Miss Thompson? And now Anne heard the door open again, and Miss Thompson's voice calling, "Who is there?" But there was no answer. Deep down in Anne's heart there crept a vague suspicion. End of chapter 21.